Hello and welcome, everyone. We're so glad you can join us. We have Karen Tibbals here. She's joining Civility First for our Civility Month, and we're near the end of Civility Month now. Um, but we're so glad you could join us, Karen. For all of you who don't know, Civility First is a 501c3 organization on Whidbey Island, and we offer workshops and events like these to the community at large. And they circle around the conversations of civility, but including tools and resources for interpersonal communication so that we can work together. I'm going to hand it over to Kathy for this particular event. And she's one of our board members on Civility First, one of the founding members. So take it over, Kathy.
Great, and welcome. Karen, welcome back to you. We were so pleased that you were with us in May for our workshop. Since we are a small number, and I know that a couple of us are zooming in from some distances, maybe we could just go around and quickly say our names and where we're from. I'm Kathy Whitmire, and I am zooming in from Whidbey Island, the south end, Clinton. Maybe I'll call on someone. Sharon, if we just each then call on somebody when you're finished.
Hi, I'm Sharon, also on Whidbey in Clinton, getting ready for the big wind. I moved out here over the summer from Chicago, so it's a wind situation. Kate.
I'm Kate Bracey. I'm the board president of Civility First, and I am zooming in also from Whidbey Island, but in Freeland, and also waiting for our October big windstorm, and I hope we don't lose power during this. And I will go to Lori.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lori Keegan. I live in Topeka, Kansas, which is the capital of Kansas, about an hour away from Kansas City. So we're right in the middle of the United States.
Great. I'm Beck, and I am also on Whidbey Island here waiting for the windstorm. Go ahead, Karen and Kathy.
Okay, just a little bit about Civility First. Since we began in case you're not familiar with us, we're a group of citizens from across the political spectrum who are concerned about normalizing uncivil discourse, both online and in other shared spaces. Like Karen Tibbals, we are committed to helping people communicate across political divides. So for instance, half of our board of directors identifies as conservative and half identifies as progressive. Since we began in 2017, we've given talks and presented workshops to service organizations, social clubs, and churches. So far, we have made over 90 presentations. 598 people have signed our civility pledge. If you would like to sign our pledge, learn more about us, attend one of our Bridging Our Differences workshops, or make a donation, you can find us at civilityfirst.org. Today's presentation by Karen Tibbals is part of our annual Civility Month, as we were talking about earlier. It takes place each October. This year's activities have included a civility-themed art contest for Bridging Our Differences workshops, an event with the authors of Beyond Civility, and we will also be making our first annual Civility Awards. So we're very pleased, as I said, to have Karen Tibbals, author of Persuade, Don't Preach, Restoring Civility, across the political divide with us this afternoon. Karen is an author and public speaker whose mission is to help people bridge cultural and political divides. She developed expertise in human behavior during her longtime career in marketing. However, she left that career to attend seminary at Earlham School of Religion, and since then has taken her understanding of human motivation to a broader audience. So, Karen, welcome back, and I look forward to hearing from you again, and ways that you can help us all communicate more effectively and respectfully across the political divides.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy. And thank you everybody from Civility First for having me come back. I really appreciate it. And I'd love to tell you, I'm going to give you an overview of the work that I had been doing in my Persuade, Don't Preach book. And then I'm going to talk about the future things that I've been working on, including my upcoming book, which will be published, I hope, next month. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Is that clear?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. As I said, the name of my book is Persuade, Don't Preach. As we all know, this country is divided. It seems like we're fighting more and more. And it isn't just our politics. It's happening on an individual level. It's happening within families. It's happening with neighbors. It's happening with coworkers. You name a relationship, it's happening. It happened to me. And this was a few years ago. It happened to me in a conversation I had with my Aunt Dot. Now, my Aunt Dot was my childless aunt, the aunt who was with me my whole entire childhood. It wasn't a holiday if Aunt Dot wasn't there with her camera, and there I am with that big smile. Though my sister's smile is pretty funny. Aunt Dot outlived her brothers and sisters. She was the last of her generation. And I went to visit her one day, and I was sitting there, and she was in their living room with her immigrant caregiver sitting on the other end. And we were talking, and she went on a rant. She'd read something in the newspaper about immigration, and she just went on a rant about how immigrants shouldn't be allowed in this country. I looked at her and I said, Aunt Dot, that's rude. Jeannie is sitting right over there. You see, she couldn't live alone. She had to have a full-time live-in caregiver, and the caregiver worked really hard to take care of her. I said that and I left. And that's the last time I saw her. The next thing I knew, she died, and I was being told about her funeral. This is happening all over the country. How can we unify this country without giving up what we believe, but learn how to talk to each other in a respectful way and not make such uneducated comments as I made? Well, I got part of my answer in a book I found in my seminary career. It's a psychology book by a gentleman by the name of Jonathan Haidt about moral foundations theory. It's a book called The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And a bunch of what I'm going to do today is take you through some things I've learned about that theory. Some of it's in the book, some of it is research that's been done since then, and some of it is my own opinion. And then I'm going to take you into more information about what I want to do in the future and what I am doing in the future. One of the best things I learned from this book, which I don't think was actually in the book, but it was in a way that I learned to think, is that we need to separate the person from the values and from the positions they take on issues. I needed to separate my aunt, the person, from the issue, immigration, and the value that she was talking about. But the values are such that they're invisible to us. We never see them. We never talk about them. We're willing to go to war for them and die for them, but we never talk about them. And it's my contention that if we start seeing those values and talking about them, that we will be able to then look at the people that we're talking to differently. And that's point number one. The next part of moral foundations theory that I'm going to take you through is a summary of what the 5 moral foundations, and I'm going to do that by taking you through some montages of pictures that I've created. And I want you to unmute yourself and call out the words that come to mind when you see this set of pictures in these particular slides. And there's 5 of them. So here's the first one. What words come to mind when you see these pictures?
Community.
Teamwork.
Community and teamwork. I'm going to call them belonging and community. Those are different than what Jonathan Haidt named, and Haidt named them loyalty to the group. But as I think community is understated in that, and so that's why I put that in there. That's number 1. What words come to mind when you see these pictures?
Authority.
Yes. Respect for authority and authority. What words come to mind when you see these pictures?
Spirituality.
Sacred.
Sacredness and purity. Spirituality is in the same vein. The 4th one is represented by these pictures.
Justice.
Fairness.
Balance.
Fairness is the words I'm going to use. Those are all great words. And the 5th one is represented by these pictures. What words come to mind?
Caring.
Yes, caring for others. So, to review, the 5 of them are belonging and community, respect for authority, sacredness, purity, fairness, and care for others. Now, there could be other words, and the words you guys gave certainly would be included in these, but just to keep our things straight, let's use these words. Now, the other thing I learned from Haidt and the research that's been done is that we all have these same 5 basic moral foundations, all of them. It doesn't seem like it, we don't, but we do. But we give different importance to them, and we have different interpretations of them. And it's the different interpretations that make us think we have different ones and the different importance. Let me take you through some of those implications as we, from the research that I've done, that I've learned about. So, the research shows that people who self-identify as liberal tend to give more importance to fairness and care for others. On the other hand, people who self-identify as conservatives tend to be approximately even across all 5 of them. Now, individual results can vary. As a matter of fact, my results don't look like that. And if anybody wants to take the survey for themselves, I can send them a copy of the survey, or I can send them to the website where they can register and take their own survey. You can see how you appear on this. What that means, those 2 slides where the conservatives are higher in certain things and liberals are higher in certain things, that means conservatives are higher in belonging. And not only are they higher in belonging, the particular interpretation they place on belonging has much more of a sense of being in a certain place than liberals tend to place on it. They tend to be more patriotic, more nationalistic, and liberals tend to be more citizens of the global citizens. The other thing is conservatives are higher in respect for authority, and they tend to respect certain authorities and not respect others. Again, a difference in interpretation and importance. Conservatives are also higher in sacredness, purity, and they have different interpretations. And here I've rearranged the pictures so that on one end, I've got all the pictures that are more Christian based. On the other hand, I've made a montage of pictures that are less tied to a specific religion. But of course, this is true across the globe, across different cultures. So the pictures would differ, they'd be very culturally specific. But in this particular case, I've chosen an American representation with more Christian pictures associated with more conservatives. Now, the part about sacredness is that when our sense of what's sacred, when our sense of what's pure is violated, we get this feeling of disgust, and disgust is actually a physiological reaction that's based in the brain, and it shows up in our expression of our face. It shows up in what's called the disgustscape, which was described by Charles Darwin, interestingly enough, where you see the flare of the nostrils and the upper lip curl. And disgust covers a broad range of items because we can find almost anything secret. We get body shape that's distorted and not what we expect. That can cause feelings of disgust. Blood and gore in places where we don't expect it can be disgusting. And racial things, different people of different races can cause disgust among some people. So this goes very, very, very deep. These are very, very important things that are very important to us. In terms of fairness, liberals place more importance on fairness itself, and they have a particular definition or a tendency towards a type of fairness, which I call a flavor of equality. And I've represented that by the balance beam with the two different stones, two different colors of stone, but they're about the same size, and the balance beam looks balanced. It looks like it works. But the balance beam on the other side is a little bit weird. Why is that one side that's so much bigger? Why is that even with the smaller side? That doesn't seem to make any sense, but it does if the smaller one is worth more. And I've used that to represent a form of fairness called merit-based fairness, where if you believe something is more important, you give it more weight, and things like effort, if people try hard. And that is found in things like college admissions, what's considered for promotions in work. We all have this form of merit-based fairness, but we don't always think about it. And we all have all forms, but we tend to favor one. And when we don't recognize the other kind of fairness, we don't understand why somebody thinks something's unfair. And this is one way to understand it. And then finally, on the last one, everyone believes in caring. Caring for young children is universal. But for conservatives, it's mediated by the other foundations, which means that makes people complicated and unpredictable. And I think we all could agree with that. But interestingly enough, the moral foundations that we've just talked about, the 5 of them, they can reinforce each other, which makes them really, really strong, or they can conflict. And if they conflict, the end result can vary, and you have no idea how it's going to come out. And again, this goes so deep. It affects the functioning of various different parts of the brain. The amygdala is involved, the insula is involved in disgust. It affects hormone production, or rather it's affected by hormone production, testosterone and oxytocin. And it affects saliva production, it affects sweat production. This is such a complicated part of our lives, these moral foundations, these values that go so deep. So let's come out of the theoretical and talk about the practical for a minute. I talked about the conflict with my aunt. What caused that conflict now that we know this theory? My aunt is the person involved in this. The issue she chose to talk about was immigration. I think, I can't ask her, but I think the value that was underneath, the value that she was referencing was probably belonging. It's a common value for immigration, although I'll talk about some other options in a few minutes. But I'm just going to guess that for her. Now me, I never really talked about immigration, but in that conversation, I was concerned about Jeannie's feelings, the immigrant caregiver. So I was concerned about care for others in that conversation. But we never talked about the values. We never talked about what was important to us. I just let it get out of hand. I got out of hand. And if I'd realized that, I don't think I would have done what I did. So going back to the 5, belonging, community, respect for authority, sacredness, purity, fairness, and care for others. So Beck, can I ask you to put in the chat those 5 because we're going to reference them in a minute.
It's done.
Great. So what I've done here is I've done a quiz about immigration, and I want you to put in the chat or unmute yourself for what moral foundation is underneath each one of these statements. I've written them. They're not perfect, but they're pretty good. And each one probably focuses on one. And if you could identify which moral foundation, use the information in the chat for which moral foundation is being referenced in a statement. And so statement number 1, keeping people from other countries out of the US harms potential immigrants. What moral foundation is being used in this statement? Any thoughts?
We have a few in the chat, so care for others and loyalty to a group.
Yes, thank you. So care for others, with the word harm, it really does focus on care for others. They're all about loyalty, but here I'm trying to illustrate that we can also be about another one as well. Number 2, keeping people from other countries out of the US isn't fair because they didn't ask to be born where they were born. What moral foundation is being referenced in that statement?
Well, there's belonging and community.
Yes, is there another one?
Fairness.
Yeah, fairness. So you got both of them in there. Number 3, keeping people from other countries out of the US is necessary because we have to ensure we have enough for people who already live here. What moral foundation is being leaned on in this statement?
I think that there's some merit on the conservative side there, right? Because people who live here merit more than people who don't.
Yes, yes.
Loyalty
Yes.
to the group?
And it's very strongly loyalty to the group also. The loyalty to the group is embedded in all of them.
And fairness seems.
But I think the fairness is also in there. I think you're right, Lori. Number 5, keeping people from other countries out of the US is necessary because we have to protect our country from being infested with people like that. What moral foundation?
Sacredness and purity is the one.
Yeah, yes.
Mhm.
Yes, that's a tip-off word, the infestation.
Yeah.
And then finally, keeping illegal immigrants out of the US is important because we need to follow the law. What moral foundation is involved there?
Respect for authority.
Respect for authority. So here we have one issue, 5 different ways of talking about it. And each one is subtly different in terms of what moral foundation is involved. So we can't just say that an issue is just one value. It can be approached in a lot of different ways. And we all have different ways of approaching it. And until we understand how we're approaching it, how the other person is approaching it, and how we approach it. And I think for me, part of this work has been uncovering what I believe and what's important to me. And doing this work of trying to figure this out, both for myself and the people I'm talking to, is a crucial part of learning how to talk to one another. And if once we know more about the values that we all share, that can help us to put a space in our reaction so that we don't just react. We can use that information and really help us slow down. But it's not just knowing, it's also how we use it. And with this, I come to the concept behind the title of the book, Persuade, Don't Preach. And I'm going to illustrate this by using an Aesop fable of the sun and the wind. The sun and the wind decided to have a contest to see which one was more powerful. The way they were going to judge the contest is which one could get the traveler to take off their cloak. The wind went first and blew as hard as it could. And how did the traveler react? It held onto their cloak as tightly as they could. The wind didn't succeed. That's preaching. And that's exactly what happens when we talk from our own point of view. The sun went next. It came and warmed up the earth, and the traveler sat down, took off their cloak, and basked in the sunlight. And that's what's happened when we can talk to each other from another person's values. We can get them to relax, and they can open up to us, and we can start to have a conversation. And it's interesting because there are two researchers by the name of Rob Willer and Matt Feinberg out of Stanford University and University of Toronto, who've done a series of studies that prove that the wind and the sun Aesop fable is true when you talk about values. They had a series of 5 studies that they did initially. They've done more, but I'm going to talk about the first 5, where they took 5 issues, 2 conservative, requirement for an army, English as a required language for the conservative values, and 3 studies that were about liberal values, universal health care, environmental protection, and same-sex marriage. And what they did was, instead of taking the kind of argument that they would normally make, they tried an argument that would appeal to the values of the other side. So for the US Army, instead of using a belonging to the group or nationalistic argument, they used a fairness argument, which would appeal to liberals. Conversely, for universal health care, a liberal, they didn't choose the liberal value, they used a conservative value of sanctity and purity. And what they found is that when they used a value that would appeal to the other side, they were able to switch positions on the issues. They didn't convince everybody, but they certainly were able to have people pay attention to things that they wouldn't have paid attention to before. And as I illustrated with the immigration list, you can take a lot of different ways into an argument with to an issue. You can talk about it with a lot of different values, but you have to really stretch your mind in order to be able to do that. But this isn't just academic research. I've been looking for examples in the real world since I've discovered this research, and I'm going to share with you a couple of them. This one comes from New Zealand after the Christchurch shooting. For those of you who don't remember, this shooting took place by a perpetrator from Australia. And what he did was he flew into New Zealand and he bought guns in New Zealand, automatic rifles. And he went to some mosques and he shot some Muslims at worship. And he was caught after the second one, on his way to the third. And after he was caught, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, a woman by the name of Jacinda Ardern, made this statement to the New Zealand community, country. This is what she said. She said, "They are us." And by that they, she means the victims. The person who has perpetrated this violence against us is not. They, the perpetrator, have no place in New Zealand. Now, the reason why this could happen is because New Zealand is a conservative country and had at that point no gun control laws. Anybody could buy guns without registration. There was no requirements for what kind of guns you could buy, because the sheep farmers need their guns. They need to protect their animals against the foxes and wolves, or I don't know what the livestock is. But what Jacinda Ardern did in this statement is she identified the victims as part of the group. So she used the belonging statement there, and she excluded the perpetrator. Now, before I had done this work, I don't think I would have seen that belonging in that statement. But she knows her people. She was just reelected recently. And what happened in New Zealand is, about 2 weeks after she made this statement, they passed their first ever gun control law, and you can no longer buy an automatic rifle without any identification in New Zealand anymore. So that will never happen again in New Zealand. And I think part of it came out of the fact that Jacinda Ardern knows how to talk to her people. The second example I'm going to give you is about the environment. Now you can see this is research results over a period of time from 1994 through 2016 about environmental protection by political party affiliation, either Republican, lean Republican versus Democrat, lean Democrat. And you can see that at the beginning of this study, in the 1994 and the rest of the 90s, there was some difference between the political parties, but not that much. But when you move into the 2010s, that gap has widened dramatically. So what's going on here? So this is an area that I am very familiar with because I used to deal with public opinion research in my career. And what I was able to uncover by doing the research is that there's a couple different events that happened in the aughts. One of which is that the oil companies came out against climate change. But the other one is more subtle. What happened is that a lot of the environmental protection campaigns went around Earth Day. And the Earth Day language usually incorporated conservative language about the sanctity and purity of the earth. But in the mid-aughts, that shifted and the language started changing to climate change and about how it's killing people or will kill people. And it shifted from conservative language of sanctity, purity to the liberal care for others language. So the combination of those two shifts, the oil company offensive against climate change and the language shift to more liberal language, I think probably pushed away some people who would have supported environmental protection efforts if they hadn't been for that change in language. And in fact, Willer and Feinberg's results agree with this. And when you use the sanctity purity language, you can get more conservative support for environmental protection. So, and interestingly enough, not only do you get more support for environmental protection, you get more support to combat climate change, even if you don't mention climate change, just by using the sanctity purity language. So there's a real mistake that people who want to combat climate change are making in terms of they don't get support from people who would appreciate the issue of environmental protection and climate change if they were spoken to in a way that they could really get behind and understand. That's example 2. I'm going to share with you one more example. This comes from Texas, which, as we know, is, I don't know, a slightly Republican state, or maybe it's a toss-up, I don't know. But this campaign is over 30 years old. So Texas was pretty conservative back then and really high in belonging. And people were really proud of being a Texan. And what was happening over 30 years ago is the littering was getting totally out of control. And the Texas Department of Transportation tried to do something about it. And they came up with this campaign, which this is a billboard from that campaign. What they did billboards, they did radio ads, they did TV ads, they did magazine ads and newspaper ads. It was all over the place and has been all over the place. And it says, don't mess with Texas. So it's using the belonging of being a Texan. The campaign has been wildly successful and people look forward to seeing what the next ad is going to say. So that uses that campaign would not work in a state that didn't have that level of belonging. So those are some examples of people who use that language, and we can use this to work towards unity if we learn to talk to each other in such a way that we can understand. But we're not creating ad campaigns. We're not creating, climate change brochures. what I want to talk about is how you apply this in an everyday relationship. And that's where the work is that I'm starting to do, and that'll be in my book that I'm publishing next month. And I think this fits together with the previous work that I just talked about, where you can change what you do in terms of not just come out and try to explain what your point of view is, but start by asking questions. And then don't make assumptions, and don't ask leading questions, ask really curious questions. And then listen. Now, listen is harder than you expect. And I know this is something that Civility First puts on their program, that they really want to encourage listening. And I think listening is an underrated skill. And listening involves things like, there's one person that I'm going to be writing about that has something called looping, where you make a statement, you listen for a while, and then you summarize what you heard in elegant language, and then you ask if that was right. So there's skills to learn in terms of listening. And then affirming, agree. We're so programmed to disagree, to find the parts that we disagree. We need to change that to find the parts where we do agree. And then finally, once you go through that, then you can perhaps use some of what I've just talked about to reframe the issue using a value that the other person, that's important to the other person. So what could I have done? Could I have used this in a way to get me past that difficult conversation with my aunt? So here's what I had wished that I had done. And now, of course, I only would have done it if I had been at the top of my game, which is another whole topic. But what I could have done is, when she started talking about immigration, I could have asked her questions. I could have said, Aunt Dot, are you saying that you're concerned about immigration because you love this country so much? Or was there something else that I need to know about? And to really ask questions. And then, of course, to listen, because if I ask questions and I don't listen, then that's really rude. I would have been doing the same thing. And then to affirm, to say, yeah, Aunt Dot, I love this country too. This country is important to me. And then finally, maybe I could have talked to her about my concern about her immigrant caregiver and say, well, what about people like Jeannie who work really hard? Because she works really hard to make you able to live alone. Don't you think people like Jeannie should be able to allow to stay here? And what I've done there is I've used the merit-based form of fairness to talk about it, which wouldn't have been natural for me. This is something that I would have had to learn. And when I do this presentation to other groups, I get people say, well, what about the other immigrants? And that's a good point. There are other ways to do it. But I would need to find a way to talk to her in a way that she could hear. And once we could talk, we could have that conversation and continue talking about it. And by having the conversation and by being clear about what's important to us, we can then start to influence each other. You know, there's one thing I'd regret about the book, and the title of the book is Persuade, Don't Preach, is it looks like I'm trying to manipulate somebody. And it's my belief that we need to continue to have these conversations to learn about each other, and then we can each persuade each other once we learn this. But until we learn to talk to each other, we're not having this conversation. So separating the person from the issue and from the value can make this easier, makes everybody calm down, and you can have the conversations in an easier way. If you like what I've been doing and you want to do more, what you can do next is to create a community to support you in this work, like the community that Civility First is providing. A book study group can help you delve deeper than you can alone. And I've created a study guide to the book, which is available. Just shoot me an email at karen@ethicalframes.com. And for the latest work that I've been doing, the work about asking, listening, affirming, and other ways to respond, please subscribe to my newsletter at Mending Fractured Relationships. To do that, you just go to my website, persuadedon'tpreach.com, and the pop-up box will get you on my list. And look for my new book of the same name, Mending Fractured Relationships, will be available around Thanksgiving. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up for questions. And I'm going to suggest that we stop recording at this point.